Currently we are in section 4 and we are about to check out the 6th video of this section. So in this video we are basically going to implement our model class, but before we proceed I want to add some dependencies in our application that will help us to implement our database. The first one will be SQFlite plugin that we discussed in the previous video. And then we will add path provider, which will help us to find the commonly used locations on the file system of both Android and iOS. And then in the end we will add Intel package, which is basically the internationalization package, which will help us to deal with the date conversion or even parsing some number or string. So within your application, move to the pubspec.yaml file and there, just below the dependencies, add the SQFlite plugin and then add the path provider. Finally, add Intel package. Now depending on the time you are watching this video, the version number for the Intel package might vary. So make sure you check for the current version by using Google, of course. And also make sure right before these packages you just have two spaces, such as 1 and 2. Again 1 and 2 like this. Otherwise you will get the error while you run the application. Once you are done, get the packages. Perfect. Now it is time to create our model class. So within the lib folder, I will just create a new package and name it as models. And then create a new Dart file and call it node.dart. Create the class of node. Now this class will help you to represent your database table. And as per our requirement, our database node table will look something like this. It will have the column of ID, title, description, priority as high and low, and then the date when the node was added to the table or the database. And these are all the entries in the table. So here within our node.dart, well, I am using underscore just to make sure these variables are private to our own library or the application. Define the title, description, date, and finally the priority level. Well, among these, the ID and the priority will be of the type of integer, and rest of them will be of the type of string. And now let us define our constructor that will help us to create our node object. Now currently all of these fields are actually mandatory. So why don't we make this description as optional? Because the user may or may not want to enter the description. So here I will just cut it and paste it here and make it optional. As simple as that. Now let us define one more constructor that will also accept ID as a parameter. So I will simply copy it and paste it down below, and as a first parameter I will add just the ID. And now here we have some error that you cannot have two unnamed constructor within the same class. So here let us make this constructor as the named constructor. That is, give it some name such as with ID. Perfect. Well, if you don't know what is named constructor, then please check out my Dart videos where I discussed about it. Thereafter, create the getter and also the setter for all of these fields. Getter for ID, getter for title, for description, priority, and finally date. And now let us define the setter. So for ID, we don't want any setter because the ID in the database will be generated automatically. But for rest of these fields, let us create the setter. For title, now you can even have a validation layer here as well. For example, if the new title entered by the user is less than 255 characters, then only save the value to the database. Otherwise, do nothing. Now in the real application, you would like to have many more conditions. I have just given you a very simple example of how to add the condition before saving it. Then for the description, for priority, well, the value of priority will only be either 1 or 2. So let us have a condition for that. Well, the priority of 1 will represent the low priority, and that node with priority of 2 will represent the high priority. And then define the setter for date. Perfect. So now we are done with the getter and setters. So our next step will be to define a function that will help us to convert the note object into the map object and vice versa, because SQFlite plugin deals only with the map objects. So here within our model class, let us define a function which will help us to convert a note object into the map object. First, instantiate a empty map object. Then insert title into the map object with the key of title. Similarly, for the description, do the same thing. Priority, then date, and also the ID. So for that I will use. Now for the ID, I have to first check if the ID is actually null or not, depending on for what purpose this function is getting used, either for insert or update operation. So accordingly, let us keep a check on that. Perfect. And finally, return the map. Now you might ask why I have defined key as string and value as dynamic. Well, the key is string in all the case, right? Such as ID, title, description, priority, and date. But on the right as a value, we can have either int ID or string title. For example, here we can have int ID, or here we can have the same thing such as string title. So in that case, we have to define our value type in such a way that it works for both int and string. So that is why I am using the dynamic keyword, which will work for both integer and string in the runtime. And now let us define a function which will help us to extract a note object from the map object. Well, this function will be the reverse of what we saw above. So here I would like to create a named constructor that will take map as a parameter and will simply create the instance of the note object. So here extract the ID, extract the title, extract the description, priority, and finally the date. Now make sure all of these keys such as ID, title, and description should match with the keys that you have supplied here. Otherwise, you will get the runtime error. So with this, we have just completed coding within our model class of Note. So in the next video, we will create our database helper class.